right. It looks like we are online. Let's turn these candles down a little bit. Facebook is there. Instagram is there. Imagine that. Instagram is lagging behind. Baby George Outdoors. BK Wilson, welcome, welcome. Are you ready for your lesson tomorrow night? Archer Kurt, Matt Lux. How are you doing, bud? And let's see. Okay, we got people jumping in. Jay Colley, I am doing well. How are you? Joshua Martinez from Instagram. 4-Point Hilton, Archer Kurt, Greg Schlinker, Scott Anstein. Okay, we're getting people rolling in. Still haven't seen anybody from YouTube yet, so of course that one's always kind of lagging. Mr. Sean Keller, how you doing? Sammy Popovici? Ooh, that's a tough one. Nice. So yeah, Maddie, I saw that. Back to work. Good for you. Glad you were able to get back. So Alan Wayne from Oregon, Michael Hamilton. YouTube is online. Josh Nordwell, hurry up, I'm melting. I like it. Idaho Bowhunter, John Wessel, Ron Thomas, BW, Kentucky is in the house. I had a pretty good conversation about Kentucky this past weekend on the way back from LeGrand at the Elk Day over there. Wayne Carlton actually jumped in the truck with me from LeGrand, and I brought him back over to Boise so he could fly back home. And he was telling me about a hunt over in Kentucky that he did. It was kind of cool. Rose, how are you doing this evening? So we will give it just a couple more minutes and we'll get cranking tonight. So Lucas Atnip, good evening. We do have some pretty good questions in from you guys both on the Facebook side and the Instagram side. So definitely looking forward to diving into those. Thank you also to all of you that made it over to Alpine Archery and Fly this past Saturday for their Elk Day. Had a great time meeting several of you in person and just meeting a lot of new people, and thank you to everyone that attended the seminar. It was a great event. I'm thankful for John and Anita for inviting me over, and must have gone okay because they invited me back for next year, and I gladly accepted. It was definitely a good time. So, all right, a couple more minutes and we'll get cranking. So tonight we are gonna kind of cover wet and dry elk hunting tactics. I know, this past winter was insane for a lot of places. I know Colorado was like 300 to 500% above normal, just absolutely insane the amount of snow that they got. So so much rich vegetation with the wet spring should be good for antler growth. Yeah, we'll kind of touch on that, my favorite part of hump day. So appreciate it. So all right, guys, let's go ahead and jump into it. So hello everybody, my name is Michael Batiste and I'm from the Elk Calling Academy. If this is your first time here, welcome. We're glad you decided to tune in and join us tonight. The way Wapiti Wednesday Q&A works is we typically start with a subject. So tonight we're going to talk about kind of hunting strategies for those wet versus dry years and how you can kind of adjust what you're looking for, and how wet and dry years also affect the elk. Now, just like always, we start with a topic, but it doesn't matter what platform you're joining us from, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. Feel free to put your questions in the comments below, and we will answer those questions the best that we can. So if this is your first time or you're just enjoying the content, make sure that you like, follow, or subscribe, and be sure to turn on notifications so that way you're notified every time we upload a new post or we go live. So all right, good 2 years ago was dry, last year was wet. Alan, why does this always happen? As soon as it starts, my kids start screaming. They know. They definitely know. So Michael Lowrey, can't wait for elk season. Yes. elk season is going to be here before we know it. In fact, I was talking about that, with this past weekend being my first seminar and starting the seminar season. It happens every year. Also starting to get more and more people that are booking one-on-one lessons. So between the seminars and all these lessons, all of a sudden I look up and holy cow, it's opening weekend. So, all right, so let's jump into this. So, wet years versus dry years. Obviously, this year in a lot of areas, it was definitely wet, way above normal snowfall in a very wet spring. So what does that, what does that mean? Carl Griffith, hello. So typically, when you have a wet year, the one thing that's kind of nice is there's ample amount of food out there, so they can definitely really pack on the calories, pack on the fat reserves to survive a winter. And also on a wet year too, because of that abundance of food, it typically has a really, really good antler growth year. And from some of the trail cam pictures and from some of the other things that I'm already seeing this year, it's already an exceptional year. There's already some tremendous horn growth out there. Now, on the flip side, on those dry years, basically it really concentrates the food. So there's not as much of it out there. And they can still pack on fat reserves, but not as much as wet years when, that food's really, really abundant. And typically in those dry years too, it does affect the horn growth and basically stunt it. Now, one of the things that I've seen also is when you have an abundance of food, the elk are really spread out a lot more, even during the rut. And sometimes in some areas, because they're so spread out, that can affect the bugling activity because you don't have all these herd bulls right on top of each other, and there's not as much competition. So sometimes there's not as much bugling. So, they don't really have to truly compete for cows. So wet years, those herds can be spread out. Now, the nice thing about that too with them spread out is if you start working one group and wind or something and you get busted, it's okay because you can go just a little bit and bump into another group. Now during those drier years, that food's concentrated, so the elk are concentrated, and because they're concentrated, you have a higher bit of competition for those cows. Now on the flip side, because they're concentrated more, they can be in larger groups, which means if you get busted, you're going to have to go farther to find that next group to work. So as far as really my tactic or my technique, I don't really change my calling technique, whether it's a wet year or a dry year. And honestly, that first part of the season when it's kind of, dry and hot, well, when it's warm and hot, I'm focusing on those more real wet, cool draws anyways. Now, these are the wet, cool draws that, you will find whether it's a dry year or a wet year. That creek is always running, it's always heavy timbered, it's always cool. And the elk know that. They know those areas. That's typically where I focus on at the start of the year. Now, during a wet year, you could have a few more of those wet draws because sometimes those creeks that, maybe dry up by August, because of the amount of snow and because of the amount of water, they still have water running, and so they still do have. So those are sometimes some hidden little nooks and crannies that you can find, especially if you're hunting, public ground, and there's other people that know about those main cool draws or those cool draws that are always there. So in a wet year, you can find some of these little pockets and definitely mark those on your GPS or your OnX or base map, whatever you use. Definitely mark those because those are sometimes little hidden gems that, people are going to go to those well-known cool draws. those cool damp draws. But you know this little pocket over here, and sometimes you could be the only one in there because nobody else really knows about it. So this is one of those things where, I've talked about keeping that journal in the past. Same thing with dropping waypoints. I'm constantly dropping waypoints when I'm out there, because one thing I really like to do when I get back is, open up Onyx on my computer so I have a much bigger view and I can really understand the area a lot more. But then also it's one of those things that I'm prepared year after year. So it doesn't matter if it's a wet year or a dry year. I've got a game plan. In fact, my hunting partners and I, we've already been discussing. We know exactly, what we're doing opening weekend, where we're going, where we're camping, all that. It's already set. So let's see. Saw a bunch popping in here. Eldon Williams, good evening. My bear is in the freezer. Now time to get more info for elk. There you go. Congrats on your bear, bud. Kelly Ford made it. Chris Siemens, hey Michael, hope all is well. Once again, glad to be here. Michael Lowrey, congrats on your bear. Danny Koyman, Chris Siemens, good food equals good hunting. Yeah, when you do have a lot of food out there, the elk really are healthy. So, and like I said, it seems like, a lot of these little nooks and crannies that you kind of fall into, it just almost seems like sometimes during wet years that the elk are just everywhere because they're so spread out. So bigger elk not good for my son, aka pack mule. Healthier food year equals harder ruts. No, not necessarily harder ruts. And Aaron, when I was talking about with them being spread out, and it can sometimes be less bugling action. That's not the case everywhere. It's kind of hit and miss, because you will still get into areas that you will have satellite bulls hanging around herd bulls, and those herd bulls, they're still going to be kind of running those satellites off and protecting the his cows and doing all that. But you also get some herd bulls that will kind of break off into an area all by themselves, that they're almost in a hidden pocket, and you almost stumble upon him because he's not making a bunch of noise because he doesn't have that competition. But those are the type of bulls too that you get in and you start cranking on that breeding sequence that we teach in the Elk Calling Academy. And I mean, it's highly effective on that bull because he's been in there with his cows and just him, nobody else around. And now all of a sudden he's hearing this breeding sequence of another bull that came into the area where he's been hanging out. And dang it, if that other bull didn't have a hot cow. And now all of a sudden he's like, well, I don't have a hot cow. And so it can kind of create some of that excitement on your own. So Bill, gonna have to catch this one tomorrow. Michael, got to root my blues on tonight. Yeah, I know, I'm competing with the Stanley Cup. That's okay. Michael, new to elk hunting, thanks for the great info. You are very welcome. Josh Nordwell, Allen, challenge him. Not sure who that's directed at or what. So when can I give you my 20 for the bow drawing? Danny, we'll do that in October. So maybe the heavy racks will slow them bulls down. Yes. Good time for practice the challenge scream. So better start training with heavier pack, need to carry bigger horns. I like it, guys. I like it. So okay. All right, so let's jump into some of the questions that we have. So this one comes from Facebook. It comes from Nick, and it says, last year was my first year hunting, and because it was dry, everyone said look for water. This year, everything is still covered in snow, so water shouldn't be an issue. What would you look for during the month of September? The area I hunt is thick timber, and I expect tons of water. So, yeah, on wetter years, there is going to be more water sources, more places for them to, get a drink. But you're still going to look for those certain things. You're still going to look for, first thing you're going to look for is those bedding areas. And then once you find those bedding areas, then you're going to start reverse engineering, and you're going to start looking for, feeding, water, travel corridors. The water is one of those things that on those wet years, man, they can be getting water a lot of different places. But you will still find that, from their bedding area to their feeding areas, there's still going to be those main travel corridors. And when I say travel corridor, it's not just a skinny narrow draw or just a skinny narrow path. I mean, uh, it could be this face that they're working from the creek bottom, and they could be spread out along this face as they're moving up, and as they get to the top, then they kind of come back together as they get into their bedding area. um, Definitely it's going to be one of those things that you are going to really want to cover ground. And this is one of those times where, because they are so spread out, that really paying attention to your surroundings, really paying attention to, that fresh sign, those fresh tracks, the fresh droppings, are you smelling them? It's a little easier to find those kind of things on um, uh, drier years, because they just have smaller amounts of areas that they can go to feed. Their bedding areas are generally remaining the same. Um, the only thing that will kind of change between dry versus wet is really where they're feeding, just because they have a lot more options on wet years. So, um, what is the title of the video that has the elk mating sequence on Patreon? Nacho, it's chapter 5. You'll basically want to watch part 1 and part 2. So part 1, I talk about using the breeding sequence in kind of a blind calling, and then part 2 is I explain it when you actually have a bull engaged, and then we have part 3 coming up where you're actually going to see me out in the trees, actually going through the breeding sequence and actually, doing it and reenacting it. So, Jim, so in a dry year, if you were to set a water hole, assuming there's water in it, and it's a good idea to set up a decoy, if so, how far from the water? Yes, decoys around water holes, if you are going to sit water holes, are a really good idea. You can actually set the decoy fairly close to that water. The biggest thing that you want to be aware of is where you are sitting. Pay attention to the trails coming into that water source, and you want to be on the downwind side of that trail. So, so if the trail comes in from the side here and the wind's kind of blowing this way, you're going to want to be down here. It's kind of tricky sometimes, because a lot of times elk will approach those water sources with the wind in their nose. So where you're sitting is really, really, really critical. I don't sit water holes a ton. I have in the past, and typically what I've done in the past is set up a decoy for the visual. I've also used some cow and heat gel, kind of down the trail a little bit, and then I've gotten off and done a little bit of light calling, and then I've stopped with the calling. The calling is only to get their attention, and then they basically come in and they hit that gel. Now I've just touched on their sense of smell. Then they come to a certain point and they see that decoy, so now I hit all 3 of their senses. So yes, decoys can be effective. Hold on, guys. Excuse me. Same for a wet year. I know the problem with water hole in a wet year is a rock with a duvet in it is a water hole. Yeah, wet years, that's one of the things that's a little tougher, because there is so many sources to get water, trying to pattern them on exactly which one. Now, obviously, if you have trail cameras out during the summer on a water source and you're getting some pretty good routine pictures, pay attention to those pictures. Pay attention to the dates, pay attention to the times, and you can get some sort of basically a pattern established. But it's one of those things that if you've got the camera up there during the summer and all you're getting is bulls, 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 bulls without any cows, there's a good chance that as soon as the rut happens, those bulls are going to disappear. They're not going to be there. They're going to go down to where the cows and calves are. So keep that in mind if you're running trail cameras. All right, Michael from Facebook. When it's dry, is it important that we are more careful moving around, since our movements walking through the woods and clear cuts are so much more noisy when it's so dry? No, not necessarily. I mean, elk make noise when they're moving through the forest. We can too. Really, the only time that you really want to be quiet and careful is really when you're moving in and really when you're setting up. That's the time that you're going to be quiet. But if you're just kind of moving through and, locating, don't worry about being quiet. In fact, I'll purposely step on sticks. And if I'm back as the caller in a setup, I will snap sticks. I will make noise when I'm moving around, because that noise adds that realism into your setup. So, those elk are used to hearing noise when elk are running around. You as the shooter, or the person as a shooter up front, the person up front does not want to make any noise. That's the person that has to be quiet. That's why, when set up and even before you really start making any noise, that shooter needs to make sure that underneath their feet is clear of any sticks, any pine cones, anything that may snap if they shift their weight at all. So, dry or wet, I find myself having trouble judging how old sign is. The other day you mentioned droppings starting out green, darkening as they age. I've seen very dark green and even almost black elk droppings that were still shiny wet, even in dry weather. I've always assumed these were pretty fresh. When I see wet dirt where the elk have urinated, even though it's not a puddle in dry weather, I've assumed these are fresh. Not necessarily. So, I mean, even if those droppings have started to turn green or brown on the outside, if you just take your boot and just kind of squish them, if they're still really soft and squish and they're still really green on the inside, those are fairly fresh. Within the last few hours. And as far as, the pea spots, I mean, I've seen pea spots still looking wet a few hours afterwards and still really, in fact, last year we had gone into a new area, parked the truck and got set up on this old cut road. And I backed up above the cut road and started calling, and then all of a sudden the wind shifted and I could smell elk, and I'm trying to get Brandon's attention, and I'm letting him know I can smell elk and all this stuff, and we're getting all excited, and we reposition, and I said, well, let's move up the hill a little bit, and I walked about 10 yards up above me, and there was a pea spot right above me from the morning, but still was smelling. So it's not that we had elk in the area, just I happened to be sitting and the wind shifted and I could smell that urine. So, Kelly, during the first 2 weeks of bow season, it's really hard to find the bachelor group / older bulls, much less get them talking. Do they stick to dark timber more than the cows in the daylight hours, especially during hot, dry weather? Okay. So your cows and calves are typically going to be at lower elevations because there's a lot more grasses down there, your meadows and parks, places that they can get into nursery groups where, the cows can basically as a group watch over all of the calves. Your bulls spend a good part of the summer much higher in elevation. So a lot of times they'll get up even above timberline to get up there out of the bugs. And they like that solitude. You will have younger bulls that will be down there with the cows and calves. Those are generally younger in age class. They just haven't got to that older age class or the size yet that they branch off and go with the bachelors. So that bachelor group older bulls, they are typically going to be higher up on the mountain than what the cows and calves are. That's why I said if you have a trail camera way high up on the mountain and you're getting a lot of bulls and you're getting excited, and then all of a sudden, you go in opening weekend, they're still there because those bachelor groups are breaking up and establishing their pecking order. but then you come back the next weekend and it's a ghost town. There's nothing there. That's because they have established their pecking order. They've broken up and they've gone down on the mountain to start rounding up cows and calves, and they've kind of gotten to that gathering phase to where they gather up those cows and calves and then start heading up to their breeding areas. So yeah, if you're having trouble kind of locating them, if all you're locating is cows and calves and younger bulls, if you're looking for older, get some elevation. So let's see what we got. Perfect, thanks, you're welcome. When elk get blown out of their normal pattern, how long until they come back to normal? That's kind of a loaded question, Danny. It really depends how much pressure. If it was just a random bump, they're going to get back into their normal pattern a lot sooner. But if it is, over the counter, heavily hunted, where they've been bumped and bumped and bumped, they may not return to that normal pattern at all that year. So they may be 1 or 2 canyons over and they've established a new pattern. So, but yeah, so if it's just that one random, it might be a couple of days. So just have to keep an eye and know kind of how many people are in there. Are they constantly getting bumped? Again, that's why I've said it in the past. That's why we don't very often go back into the same place day after day after day after day. So we try to let those elk rest. We try to keep them in that normal pattern as much as possible. But also, too, it seems like if you give them a few days, if you were in there calling and working a bull and something happened, you didn't get a shot, it seems like, give that little break of a couple of days or a few days. When you go back in there, you can re-engage that same bull again, and it's just like you never even encountered him. So, but if you're going in there day after day after day after day, remember, we're creatures of habit. We typically find the easy path or easy trail into area, and that's the same trail that we hit every day. I've sat up on the mountain and watched people hit the same trail every day, bugle in the same spot every day, do the same thing every day after day after day after day. And they have success the first couple of days or so, but then as they repeat that and do it over and over and over and over, everything around kind of clues into that pattern and goes, yeah, something's not quite right here. So Dave West, Washington draws are out. I didn't get drawn, but my son got an antlerless rifle youth tag for elk. Nice. I know during September you're looking for northeastern aspects. In early November, what would you be concentrating on for looking for areas? So November, basically, depending on whether the snow is set in or not, but as soon as that rut is over, mid to late October, those elk are basically staging at that point, trying to pack on as much fat reserves as they can that they lost during the rut. But they're basically just staging, getting ready to move to their winter grounds. A lot of times you're going to find them, because it is colder in temperature, you're going to find them spending more time on southern facing slopes, because if it did snow a little bit, those southern facing slopes are typically the one that the snow is going to melt off quicker on, and they're going to have access to that feed, so they're going to be hanging out on those sides a little bit more, and they may just be bedding down on those sides too, because since it is colder, they necessarily don't have to go back around to those northeastern facing slopes. So with that November time frame, keep an eye on temperature and weather. So if it's clear and cold, hit those southern slopes, hit those open ridges, hit those places where they'll be feeding, kind of staging. And if you have the ability to know where they winter, then basically go from where they are, during archery or September, to where they winter, and find a travel corridor, find a travel route, and usually it's a long draw or something that they can just follow, that's almost just a funnel that follows it out, and just start working those areas there. All right, Mr. Chad Moss, how you doing? Jim Hargrove, welcome. Jay Cawley, what about wolves? If they bump the elk out, how long till they come back? it, it depends on, are the wolves just moving through the area? Is it a pack that has been hunting the area? There's a few factors and equations that you need to figure out. If it's just a random pack of wolves that's just moving through an area, a lot of times the elk will just bump right out and then come right back in. Um, this is where, kind of understanding wolf behavior, you know, how far they go to hunt in that area, because wolves can, they can cruise 10, 15 miles or more, just looking for game and hunting and cruising around. And some packs will actually have 2 or 3 different den sites that they will move throughout the year, from one den site to another to another. So yeah, it just depends on if it's a pack that's consistently hunting that area. It's going to be a little while before the elk come back. The elk might actually wait until that pack moves on kind of to their next end site or their next hunting area before they move back in that area. So Shane Rasmussen, better late than never. How you doing, bud? So, all right. So that takes care of the questions on the Facebook side. Let's jump over to the Instagram side. So, C. Sleister. We have a really wet year here in Colorado as far as snowpack goes. You guys had an insane snowpack year. That being the case, are elk more likely to hang out at lower elevations during September since the snow up high will be melting off later, or will they still seek higher altitude if the temperature is hot come hunting season? They will still move up the mountain. I mean, a lot of times, especially those bachelor group of bulls or those solitude bulls, they'll follow the snow line up. And usually up on the higher elevations, you still get enough melt that will have little pockets of opening. Because as that snow line moves up, those plush new shoots that are growing, those plush new grasses, have a ton of nutrients in them, and that's what those elk are looking for. So they're going to follow them up. Same thing, the cows and calves, they're going to be a little bit later because depending on where that snow line is and where they're at when calving season hits, that's typically kind of where they're going to stay for a while, just so that the cows can really bulk up, that they can produce that milk, that the calves can grow. And then, like I said, those bulls will drop down from the higher elevations, gather up their herds, and then move back up into their breeding areas. So, the only time that they may stay, wow, sorry guys, the only time they may stay a little bit lower is if it was a really insane snow year and you had really quick melt off and the weather or the rivers just really, really got swollen. Cows aren't going to risk crossing that swollen river with newborn calves. That's something that we experienced a couple of years ago in that new area. In fact, it was crazy, the new area, we got into it and got into all these elk, and then we ended up talking to the biologist. And he told us that about 65% of the elk didn't even make it back up into, that area until late in the year. And we noticed, too, that, the bulls disappeared for maybe a little bit longer than what normally they would have had to do because they had to go a little bit farther to round up those cows and calves. So, but no, they will work their way back up on the mountain. So, okay, looking to see if any other questions popped in. Nope, looks like we're good. Okay. To John Oliver, Danny Coyman. Jay, just take out the wolves. There you go. Michael Hamilton, great information. Thank you. So, okay, so I know there's a lot of different ways and approaches, to hunt elk. We've had a couple of people, talking about sitting water sources. For those of you that, just want to kill an elk, It doesn't matter if it's a cow or a spike or a younger bull. In the dry years, focusing around kind of your water sources um, is kind of your best bet, and that's where you can kind of, couple that water source with kind of just that midday cow routine that we've talked about. Just 2 or 3 soft cow calls, wait 4 or 5 minutes. The hard part with this one, like I said, though, is wind direction. Because those elk coming in downwind, and this is where tree stand. I know I said it. Tree stand really comes into play. I personally can't do it, but I do know some people, and I have some friends that do it very successfully. Year after year. The hard part with that during a wet year is focusing on that consistency. I mean, they're still going to have their favorite spots. And that's where, instead of maybe focusing on the water source, you kind of focus on wallows. Um, you know, Bulls typically have the wallows that they like to hit. Now, that's another thing about, dry year versus wet year. Wet year, you're going to have more places that they can wallow out there versus on a dry year. Dry year, it's going to kind of be, some dedicated places. Um, but again, this is one of those things that, just like we talked about with those kind of cool dark draws for early season. Sometimes these hidden wallows during real wet years can be really, really effective, because it's wallows that aren't there year after year after year after year. Um, and so, again, not a lot of people know about it, or maybe somebody stumbled across it during a dry year and go, oh, hey, look, yeah, cool, an old wallow, or this or that, and they never think to come back and check it on a wet year. Wet years are one of the things that kind of open up and give you a lot more opportunities on places that you can hunt. And the other thing that I found about wet years too is it seems like not only are the elk spread out, but people hunting are spread out a little bit more too, because everybody's not concentrated and piling into those focus areas like they would be on a drier year. So, all right, what other questions do you guys have on wet versus dry years? So, while you guys are popping in your next questions, we'll kind of talk about upcoming events. So, not this coming Saturday, but next Saturday, June 22nd, up in Hayden, Idaho, we'll be having that elk hunting / calling class. There are still a few tickets available. Tickets are $50 per person. This is not your typical seminar. This is a full-blown class, starting from choosing diaphragms, the basics, going through, calling strategies, elk behavior. It is going to be a 4.5 hour class. We will go about halfway through. Lunch will be provided. So definitely, if you guys are in northern Idaho, eastern Washington, or western Montana, definitely pick up tickets for it. You can get tickets off of the Elk Calling Academy Facebook page, or you can go to Eventbrite and just do a search for Elk Calling Academy and get tickets. Eldon, yes, that is the same weekend as Northwest Mountain Challenge. So I know we had scheduled this quite a while ago, and unfortunately everything was already set and tickets were already bought, and with the rest of the seminar schedule, just there wasn't any chance to change it. So we do have a pretty good group that has already bought tickets for it, but like I said, there are still some seats available. So after that, next seminar will be in July, I think the 19th and 20th, over in Etna, Wyoming at Archery Unlimited. This one's going to be fun because Wayne Carlton and I are tag teaming. If you guys have never had a chance to meet Wayne or talk to Wayne, this is really going to be kind of his farewell tour this summer. So um, you definitely want to try to get over to this event at Archery Unlimited. And Wayne and I talked about it quite a bit, and we got some fun stuff planned. So, Danny, why are you leaving Utah out? Just saying, because no archery shops or clubs in Utah got a hold of me. They didn't want me to come over. So, yeah, I know Utah got left out, Montana, Arizona. So, Joshua, what's the longest shot you think is realistic? So, that really depends from person to person. Me personally, my max shot that I will take on an elk is 40 yards. I will not shoot past 40. Not on the first shot. If I have an arrow in a bull and I want to do a follow-up shot, I will stretch that out. But that first shot, um, I know how incredibly tough these critters are, and I've seen too many things happen. So for me personally, it's 40 yards. But each person's a little bit different. You know, it's what you're comfortable with, and what you have confidence in. You know, how calm is the animal? Is the animal relaxed? Is it nervous? I mean, there's a lot of factors that you have to kind of go into answering those first before you can really answer that question. So, but me personally, 40 yards. I mean, my average shot on all the elk that I've harvested has been 21, 22 yards. Pretty dang short. So, Jonathan, how you doing, bud? So, would you consider using a saddle stand over a wallow to save weight? Charles, I have not spent any time in a saddle stand. I've seen them and really curious about them, but I personally have not spent any time in them at all. And I know that is one thing about stands over a wallow, you know, how far back it is and how far you have to pack it in. And I know that is one thing that's really nice about a saddle stand because of that weight. I would say if you're comfortable in it and you can shoot proficiently out of that saddle stand, by all means use it. It's a great tool. So I just don't have any personal. So Skylar Jensen, got to meet him this weekend. He is an amazing guy, as well as you. Skylar, thank you. It was a lot of fun over there. I know Wayne and I, like I said, talked about it as we headed back to Boise. You know, that's one thing that's kind of cool about traveling with Wayne. He is a storyteller and very animated. So if you ever have any amount of time on a road, and you need somebody to kind of keep you awake, Wayne is an outstanding travel partner for that. So Michael Hamilton, I'm writing my staff schedule for that week today and tomorrow. So far it's looking like I might make it to Hayden. Should participants bring anything, diaphragms or bugle tubes? Yes, by all means, bring your calls. That is one of the things that I'm planning on doing at this is, you know, doing some one-on-one work. So I do know that some of the sponsors are sending some goodies over for giveaways. I don't know what all they're sending. I believe Native's going to be sending some reeds over. But yeah, definitely bring what you have so that we can, you know, do some, because we're going to be working on some drills. Like I said, this is kind of going through everything. So yeah, definitely be beneficial. So, all right, guys, we are about 15 minutes out. So I am going to open it up for the last round of questions. So let me jump over and check the other pages and see if don't see anything there. Okay, nothing on that one. Skylar, when will you do something more along the lines of this in Eastern Oregon? Probably not this year, just because of the seminars that are already scheduled, Skylar, but definitely something that could put on the docket for next year. You know, maybe I could talk to John and Anita there at Alpine Archery and Fly, and maybe we can see about maybe picking a different weekend than the elk day and just kind of schedule something like this. So yeah, I'll put it on the docket and I'll follow up on that. So Jonathan, not sure yet. So there's a lot of things that are cooking and happening right now. So we're still up in the air. I don't have anything in concrete yet for Oregon. Depending on what sponsors send, you may want to let them know I'm left-handed. Michael, I can tell you, there's not going to be any bows at the seminars for giveaway right now. So I like it. Be awesome to get in on one-on-one calling instruction from you. Well, Skylar, there is so. For those of you that are fairly new and maybe you don't know, with Elk Calling Academy, I do offer one-on-one lessons. You don't have to be in the Boise area. And in fact, tomorrow night I do have one with somebody that's out of state. And I've done these with people all the way back over on the East Coast, but I use Zoom video conferencing. We can do one-on-one instructional. The Zoom works really, really well because it does incorporate the camera. We are face-to-face just like this right now and having conversations, and can sit there and do a lot of interactions with, reed placement and moving the reed forward or back and tongue contact and really sort through a lot of those things. So, okay. So can you explain why an elk would use a chuckle versus a grunt? Okay. This is where you kind of get, and in fact, it's funny because this past weekend we were standing in a group, and it was Dan Clower from Deep Timber Sounds, myself, Wayne was there, and there was a couple of people standing in the group, but we were basically talking about elk vocalizations and elk sounds. And, a lot of this terminology is things that we as humans put on the sounds that we're hearing so we can talk about them and teach about them. I know that there's some people that will call one thing a chuckle and call another a grunt. I have always called them both chuckles. The only difference to me is you have an excited chuckle versus a aggressive chuckle. Now, the grunt, when I hear grunt, I think more of a growl that you'll hear at the start of the bugle or at the bottom of the bugle, or maybe just a growl before they go into it. So, Jim, curb that table until I'm up there in a couple of weeks, and we'll kind of have that conversation a little more so that I understand more of what you're calling a chuckle and what you're calling a grunt, so then I can easier answer that question. So. John, okay, if I go scouting during summer, where would I look to find them in a new area, dry versus summer? So, well, it depends. John, what are you looking for? Are you looking for bulls? Are you just looking for elk? Are you, looking? Because when I go in to scout a new area, there's a lot of different things that I'm looking for. Yes, I want to see some animals because I want to see, and I'm going to hit different elevations on the mountain. I want to know in that new area at what elevation the cows and calves are hanging out. I want to know at what elevation the bulls are hanging out. But then I also want to know and find old elk sign, or old rutting sign. Wallows, rubs, those kinds of things. Because if I can find those different things, and this is where just boots on the ground, covering miles and covering different elevations is going to kind of give you this information. And deploying trail cameras to at elevations is also going to help you with those. Because basically what all this information is going to give you is when you get to the elevation where the cows and calves are hanging out, okay, that's great. Keep that, know that. Go higher up on the mountain, then you find where the bulls are hanging out, the bachelor groups, the solitude bulls, and this and that. Now you know where those bulls are at during the summer, where those cows and calves are at during the summer, but then you also know that once those bulls, after they break up from their bachelor groups, you know where they are going to head to round up their cows, to round up their herds, And then based on that old rutting sign that you found, those rubs and wallows, now you know where they're going to go during the rut. So with all this information, that first part of the season, I'm going to focus on kind of up on that elevation where those bulls are hanging out in those cool draws up on that higher elevation, focusing on that. Then as the season progresses, then I'm going to come down on the mountain to where the cows are, first part of September when they're in that kind of gathering mode. And then after 14th, 15th time frame, then I'm going to focus my efforts onto where I found that old rutting activity. So hopefully that kind of answers that question for you a little bit there. Skylar, sweet, I'll have to look into this. Can't wait till Wyoming with you and Wayne. I'm sure it will be a good time. We're hoping so. We were kind of debating whether he was going to go and then I was going to go, and we just kind of decided, what, we're both going to stand up there and kind of feed off each other and then see what you guys are throwing at us. So JMet, predictions on antler growth because of a good moisture content year. So Jonathan, this year should be a great year for antler growth. You guys may not see as much change over in the coastal because you guys are generally pretty wet and whatnot, but other areas, in the Rocky Mountain Belt, they definitely are affected a lot more of the dry versus the wet. So, okay. Dang it. If I'm hunting and sleeping from my pack, how far do I need to pack out from the elk so I don't lose them overnight? So, Andrew, the thing you're going to want to do is make sure that when you set up camp, you are at lower elevations than what they are. So, because at night with thermals blowing down, you want to make sure, you're on the, dang it. Sorry, guys. I'm just getting choked up and emotional tonight. You're definitely going to want to make sure that you're downwind of them. As long as you're downwind of them, you shouldn't have to go, too terribly far. It really depends on kind of the terrain and where they're feeding and where you can go. The biggest thing is, getting into those areas where that thermal is consistent. And then the other factors are, what are you going to be doing when you're setting up camp? Are you going to be building a little bit of fire to dry some things out? Maybe warm up a little bit because temps have been really, really cold. If you're going to build a fire, you're going to want to go, a little bit farther away. But the other thing too is since you are camping off, or you have camp on your back and you're hunting and you're basically sleeping with the elk, it's not that big a deal the next morning to tear down camp, throw everything in your bag, and cover half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, or a mile. So you can cover those, pretty dang quick. So you want to go far enough away that you're controlling your thermals, but still close enough that you can still kind of hear their activity, just in case they kind of feed and kind of wander a different direction. That's the other thing too that you'll want to kind of keep in mind when you're setting up. And that's where, if you have the ability to hunt that place year after year and kind of learn those habits, you'll kind of find those little nooks and crannies of where you can kind of tuck in and get away from them. So, Danny, how do I get my wife to let me quit my job so I can hunt all hunting season since we are all asking questions? Danny, I wish I had the answer to that. I still have a day job. I don't get to hunt all hunting season. I used to. I think the longest I hunted was 6 weeks straight for elk in 2 states. We hunted Idaho and Montana one year for 6 weeks. Sounds awesome, extremely exhausting, and will flat out beat you down. So sorry, bud. Don't have any answers to help you on that one. So, All right, guys, I think we are going to wrap this one up for tonight. Hopefully, we answered your questions. One last check, real quick, to see if anything snuck in. I'm not seeing anything there. So we may be good. Oh, got a message. What is this? Nope. Okay. All right, guys. I think we are there then. So appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for tuning in tonight. For you, last one. August 25th opens here. Quack, just stopping by to say hello. How you doing, bud? Michael Hamilton, hope to see you. And Hayden, thanks for another great session. You bet. So, so last one, August 25th opens here. Should I get in early? So August 25th, I mean, you're basically going to be in that time frame, Andrew, of those bulls kind of breaking up from their bachelor groups, establishing their pecking orders. So, yeah, you're definitely going to want to leave camp in the dark and kind of get elevation, just because it is going to heat up pretty quick in the day that they're going to head to bed early. So, kind of your window in that morning time frame is pretty slim, but also too, staying out there, you can definitely hit some pretty decent midday activity in those cool dark draws again. So Lars, what's on for tomorrow night? So yes, tomorrow night is the next Patreon only Q&A on the Patreon page. We are going to be talking about implementing calf sounds into your calling setups, and also how to really maximize your growls by using your vocal cords at the start of the bugle and the end of the bugle to kind of add a little bit more aggression to those. So that's on the docket for tomorrow night for Patreon. For those of you that are interested in joining the Patreon page, it is $15 a month. Simply go to elkcallingacademy.com and you can join the herd there. We are bumping up closer and closer to drawing a winner for the Blacks Creek Guide Gear Pack. So as soon as we hit 100 patrons, going to draw a name. That person's going to be able to basically just go to Blacks Creek, their website, pick any pack they want, and then I am going to go in and pay for that pack, and Sandy's going to ship that pack directly to the winner's door. So again, elkcallingacademy.com. We will do that. Is it tax deductible on the $15 a month? No, it's basically an e-course. Unless, of course, you have a business that is in the hunting industry, you would have to talk to your tax accountant about that to see if that would be deductible. I'm not sure. So, all right, guys, again, appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in. I greatly appreciate the support, guys. So as always, keep calling, keep practicing. Most importantly, though, have fun. And we will see you all next week on the next episode of Wapiti Wednesday Q&A, brought to you by Elk Calling Academy. Have a great week, everybody.